Welcome to our weekly 3-minute therapy podcast. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, a clinical psychologist. My co-host is Mick Berry, and we're both experts in REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, which is an approach to psychotherapy which was devised by the brilliant psychologist Albert Ellis in the 1950s, which created a radical shift in the psychotherapy movement from the more psychoanalytic model. Your dysfunctional childhood is the reason for your problems now, rather than the more up-to-date research-oriented approach, which is that it's your thinking which causes your emotional and behavioral problems. And that's normally thinking in terms of demands: must, should, supposed to's, have to's, I can't stand it's, and it's awfulizing. And there are three main irrational beliefs. And the first is a demand on oneself. I must do well and get approval. And if I don't, I'm no good. Others must treat me well. And if they don't, they're no good. And my life must go well, must be comfortable, fair, easy, not boring. And if it's not, then my life is horrible. And that often leads to addictions uh, and depression. Mick, do you want to add anything to that?
Just that REBT and cognitive therapy nailed it, that our emotions and our thoughts are connected, and that really that's as far as the reality goes. So REBT and cognitive therapy are accurate, whereas Freudian analysis is out to lunch.
Right. And we could, if we want to go back historically, we could say some of the Stoics nailed it. Epictetus said, it's never events that upset us, but rather it's our thinking about events. And Albert Ellis drew on Stoicism and some other ideas to come up with rational emotive behavior therapy. Mick?
I was just going to say, and by upset us, we're talking about emotionally upset. If
Yeah.
someone takes a sword and cuts off my arm, we're not talking about emotional upset here. We're talking about a great disadvantage to me, and that is indisputable.
Yeah, that's physical pain. And we're talking about emotional pain.
Right.
And the difference is emotional pain is self-created. And that's good news, because if you're creating your anxiety, anger, or depression, then you can uncreate it. You can change it. And Mick, you like to say anything you can create, you can uncreate. Is that right?
Anything you're capable of doing, you're capable of not doing. Uh,
Yeah.
However, I think we would also say that emotional pain is not always self defeating. If I am deeply in love with somebody and they break up with me, I might probably would find it quite distressing and emotionally painful, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily self defeating to me. It's nice to have strong emotional ties to somebody, and if I'm not able to be with them, I would find it emotionally painful, but that doesn't mean it's self defeating because I give myself the capacity to enjoy being emotionally close to somebody. However, if I start thinking my life is no good because of this pain, then I am adding to the fundamental emotional pain.
Right. My life is no good. I'm no good. Uh,
Or they're no good.
or they're no good. Exactly. Okay, let's get to our subject today, and that is hoarding. And I would define hoarding as saving, usually household items, saving household items that are no longer useful and contribute to clutter and dysfunction. And I've had a number of clients over the years who have had that problem. Mick, do you want to add to that definition?
Well, hoarding can also mean clothing that is no longer worn or anything that is no longer useful or possibly not useful. There are sometimes things which we have that could be on the fence. Am I going to be using this or not? Do I get rid of it or not? And I've generally found if it's on the fence, it's a good idea to get rid of it.
Yeah. Or another rule of thumb is if you've had something for 5 years and you haven't used it, then uh, it's probably safe to get rid of it. Now, there are demands, musts, and shoulds that lead to hoarding, and uh, some of them consist of I must not discard something I may want to use in the future. I must not deprive myself of something I may have use for. I must avoid frustration about being without an item. Or some people, believe it or not, develop an affection for items that they've used for many times, many years, or clothing they've used for many years. And they feel like they can't stand parting with it, like parting with an old friend. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say my father had a term for this that I found particularly useful. He referred to a friend of his as a constipated person because he kept everything. And just calling hoarding constipation encourages me not to do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So then the question is, what are some solutions to hoarding? And one of the main ones in terms of the cognitive part, the cognitive causes of hoarding, is questioning, challenging, and contradicting your musts. What's the evidence? I absolutely have to keep this pair of pants, even though I may want to use it, wear them in the future? Or what's the evidence I must keep something that's been helpful in the past? And so once you question those musts and shoulds, then normally you'd come up with preferences, desires, wishes, but not musts. I prefer not to be frustrated if I threw something out that I could use in the future, but there's no reason why I must avoid frustration. I prefer to not to deprive myself of a dear item, but there's no reason I have to avoid that deprivation. So those are some of the ways you can question your musts and come up with a better philosophy, a must-free philosophy. Okay, so another interesting thing about hoarding is that there have been identical twin studies that indicate in 50% of the time there's a genetic influence in hoarding, that identical twins 50% of the time have hoarding disorders. Mick?
I was just going to say that that if we think, well, I can let go of this, I don't have to have it, that in letting go of our demands, the more passionate we are about something, the easier it is to turn it into a demand. And therefore, REBT advocates practice to keep our passions from becoming demands. A lot of people think the solution is to have no passion. Then, if you want something a great deal, it's very easy to turn it into demanding that you must have it. But what fun is that? REBT advocates just simply practice wanting something a great deal and not demanding to have it. And it's very possible, and in fact, quite likely, that as somebody practices not turning their passions into demands, that they'll be able to live a very happy, passionate life, anxiety, depression, and rage free.
In practicing changing your thinking, keep in mind that it's often a process, not a product. Practice, practice, practice. It doesn't mean that you're going to be 100% rational if you do the practice, but you'll get much more rational, less anxious, depressed, angry, and addicted if you do practice. Mick?
I was going to say, could you define process? Because I've heard people use that term often, and I'm not really sure what it means.
By process, I mean an ongoing practice. Uh,
It's
just like
something.
if you want to develop a habit, you do it again and again and again, and then eventually it that's the process. Yeah, Mick?
A continual practice then.
Yeah, exactly.
Like playing an instrument would be a process.
That's right. Yeah.
Now you get to the point, I think Itzhak Perlman said he could not pick up the violin for 3 weeks and not lose anything, but after 3 weeks he would start to notice
Uh,
diminishing ability.
yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, Mick, anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
George Carlin had a bit about this. He talked about a place for my stuff, and he has a whole bit about people keeping their stuff. Also, have you had clients talk about this where a lot of people have storage units where they put all of this stuff and they hoard stuff in the storage unit and they keep it out of their house so it's at least out of the way, but then they're paying $400 or $500 a month to have a place to put their stuff, and it might not be necessary to pay $400 or $500 a month to have a place to put your stuff so it's out of the way. Then again, the stuff might be important enough to keep, but I can't imagine putting something in a storage unit and keeping it for 10 years, spending $400 a month. That would be over the course of 10 years, $48,000.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good practical approach. I have another client currently whose wife is a hoarder, and a practical thing he does to deal with it is when she's not home, he takes some of her stuff from the room that's filled up with her clutter and throws it out, and then she doesn't even miss it.
Well, if somebody can live with a certain amount of dishonesty or secretiveness, I should say, in their marriage, then that could be a solution.
Yeah, it was a lesser of the evils because when he spoke to her about it, she always promised she'd get rid of stuff, but never did.
Yeah,
So it was a lesser of the evils.
yeah. And
Okay.
also, lastly, Thoreau wrote about this in Walden that there was some tribe in Africa that had a yearly practice of collecting everything that was not needed and setting fire to it, putting it into a big pile and setting fire to it. And Thoreau advocated he said this could be a great practice for everybody to adopt once a year. Take everything you don't need and throw it out. And he said you would feel very, very good year by year, just very lighter in the way you were living.
Yeah. And it's not necessary to burn it these days. You can donate it to some charities.
Right.
Okay, very good. Uh, Thanks for your help, Mick, and my co-host. I'm Dr. Michael Edelstein, clinical psychologist, author of 3 Minute Therapy, where we address rational emotive behavior therapy and show how you can use it with different issues, different emotional and behavioral problems. And thank you, Chris Rossini, our technical engineer. Comment below if you have thoughts about the podcast or if you'd like to volunteer, and we'll be happy to cure you of some problem, hoarding or otherwise. Give us a thumbs up if you got some benefit from this, and subscribe to the 3 Minute Therapy podcast to do what, Mick?
You stay on the rational side of life.